Fate had a way of playing cruel tricks, weaving lives together in ways no one could anticipate. Sophia Carter had always felt like a prisoner in her own home, bound by invisible chains forged by tradition, expectation, and the relentless ambition of her mother, Eleanor Carter. From the moment she was old enough to understand, she had been groomed to be the perfect daughter, the flawless heiress to a powerful business empire. Every aspect of her life was dictated: how she dressed, how she spoke, and most importantly, whom she would marry. Her mother's voice echoed through the grand, marble-floored mansion, sharp and unyielding as ever. "Sophia, I won't ask again." "Who is that man?" Eleanor's piercing gaze locked onto her daughter as she stood at the top of the staircase, her arms folded in a stance of quiet rebellion. Sophia turned away, gripping the railing tightly, her heart pounding against her ribs. She knew what was coming. "He's just a friend, Mom," she answered flatly, though the truth weighed heavy on her tongue. Eleanor's heels clicked against the polished floor as she ascended the stairs. "A friend? Since when do we entertain friends in secret? And since when do you get to decide who comes and goes in this house?" Sophia clenched her jaw, inhaling sharply. "Since when do I get to decide anything?" She shot back, her voice rising with the weight of suppressed frustration. Eleanor's expression darkened. "Watch your tone, young lady." Sophia turned to face her mother fully, her eyes burning with defiance. "No, Mom. I'm done watching my tone. I'm done pretending that my life belongs to me when it doesn't." She could feel the fury bubbling to the surface, years of silent submission unraveling in an instant. "You dictate everything. What I wear, what I eat, who I talk to, and now who I marry. And why? Because of some deal you made behind my back. Because of benefits you." Her voice cracked, but she refused to let the tears fall. Eleanor's gaze remained cold, unmoved. "I'm doing what's best for you, Sophia. You will thank me one day." Sophia let out a hollow laugh. "Thank you." "For what?" "For selling me off like a prized possession. For deciding my future before I even had a chance to live." Her hands curled into fists. "What about love, Mom? What about happiness?" Eleanor's expression barely flickered. "Love is a luxury, Sophia. Stability, power. These are what matter. Love is fleeting. Arranged marriages have built empires, and ours is no different." Sophia shook her head, her stomach twisting at the cold logic. "Then you should have been the one to marry into this deal. Why do I have to sacrifice my happiness for your empire?" Eleanor's patience snapped. "Because you are my daughter. And as long as you live under my roof, you will do as I say." Her voice rang through the vast corridor like a final verdict. Sophia's breath came in short gasps, her vision blurring as she stared at the woman who was supposed to love her, protect her. But Eleanor Carter had never been just a mother. She had always been a businesswoman first. The weight of defeat settled over her like a suffocating blanket. There was no escaping this. Not when Eleanor held all the cards. Not when every door was locked from the inside. Eleanor exhaled, smoothing out her silk blouse. "Tomorrow, Nathaniel Montgomery and his family will be here. The wedding will be discussed. You will present yourself properly, with grace and dignity." Sophia's stomach churned at the name. Nathaniel Montgomery. The man she had never met. The man who was supposed to own her future. "Get some rest," Eleanor added, her tone final as she turned away. "Tomorrow is an important day." Sophia remained frozen in place as her mother disappeared down the hallway. A hollow emptiness settled inside her chest, spreading like poison. No matter how much she fought, her fate had already been sealed. Unless she found a way to escape. The morning arrived too soon, and with it came the suffocating weight of expectation. Sophia sat before her vanity, watching the reflection of a girl she hardly recognized. Her mother's presence loomed behind her, watching with hawk-like precision as the stylist curled and pinned her hair into perfection. The dress Eleanor had chosen was elegant, expensive, and utterly lifeless. Much like the future Sophia was being forced into. Her stomach twisted with unease as the sound of cars pulling up the driveway echoed through the estate. They were here, the Montgomerys. Her fate, dressed in tailored suits and perfectly rehearsed pleasantries, had arrived. "Smile," Eleanor instructed as she placed a delicate pearl necklace around her daughter's throat. "And for once, try not to embarrass me." Sophia bit the inside of her cheek to keep from retorting. There was no point in fighting now, not when her mother had already set the pieces in motion. She followed Eleanor downstairs, her heartbeat drumming against her ribs like a war cry. The Montgomerys were already settled in the grand sitting room when they arrived. Robert Montgomery, the patriarch, exuded an air of quiet authority, his sharp eyes scanning the room like a man who never entered a negotiation he didn't intend to win. Beside him, Margaret Montgomery smiled with calculated warmth, her designer jewelry shimmering under the chandelier light. But Sophia's gaze was drawn to the man standing beside them, the one who was meant to be her husband. Nathaniel Montgomery was handsome in the way of men who knew their worth. Tall, sharp-featured, with an effortless confidence that spoke of privilege. He offered a polite, businesslike smile when their eyes met, and Sophia felt nothing. No spark, no intrigue. Just the hollow realization that she was expected to spend her life with a stranger. "Ah, Sophia," Margaret cooed, stepping forward to take her hands. "You're even more beautiful in person than I imagined." "Thank you," Sophia murmured, her voice as composed as she could manage. Nathaniel extended his hand, his grip firm but impersonal. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you." Sophia forced a smile, playing the role she had been assigned, likewise. The room hummed with conversation. Talk of business, alliances, and, of course, the impending wedding. Sophia barely heard any of it, her mind lost in the noise of her own thoughts. The weight of it all pressed down on her until she could barely breathe. Then, like a sudden storm, the atmosphere shifted. "I believe we need to discuss something urgent," Robert Montgomery said, his voice carrying a gravity that stilled the room. Eleanor frowned slightly. "Urgent?" Margaret hesitated, her polished exterior cracking just slightly before she plastered on another smile. "Nathaniel has some news." Sophia's pulse quickened as all eyes turned to Nathaniel. He exhaled slowly, a flicker of unease crossing his expression before he straightened his shoulders. "I got married." The words dropped like a bomb, shattering the carefully constructed facade of the meeting. Eleanor's expression hardened in an instant, her grip tightening around the armrest of her chair. Sophia blinked, convinced for a moment that she had misheard. "I'm sorry." "What?" Eleanor's voice was deadly calm. "I got married," Nathaniel repeated, his tone unwavering. "Last week. It wasn't planned, but it was what I wanted." Silence settled over the room like thick fog. Margaret let out a delicate sigh, as if she had prepared herself for this moment, but still wished it had gone differently. Robert's expression was unreadable, but the tension in his posture was clear. Eleanor was the first to break the silence, her voice sharp as a blade. "And when exactly were you going to inform us of this decision, Nathaniel?" Nathaniel met her gaze head on. "Today." Sophia didn't dare breathe. Was this real? Was she free? She waited for the moment of relief to sink in, but it never came. Margaret cleared her throat, stepping in before the room could fully descend into chaos. "Obviously, this changes things, but our families still have an arrangement to honor." Sophia's stomach twisted. No, no, this was supposed to be the end. Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line, meaning. Margaret turned to Robert, who nodded in quiet agreement, before she delivered the final blow. "Nathaniel may no longer be available, but our second son, Lucas, is." Sophia's breath caught in her throat. Lucas Montgomery. She had heard of him before, always mentioned in passing. Nathaniel's older brother, the one who kept to himself, the one who never showed interest in the spotlight. If Nathaniel had been groomed to be the perfect heir, Lucas had always been the outlier. Cold, calculated, unyielding. And now, he was meant to be her husband. "No," Lucas's voice cut through the tension, startling everyone in the room. Sophia turned just in time to see a man standing in the doorway. He was nothing like Nathaniel. Where Nathaniel carried an easy confidence, Lucas Montgomery was all sharp edges and piercing eyes. He radiated an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. His gaze flickered over her only briefly before settling on his parents. "I'm not interested." Robert Montgomery sighed, rubbing his temples, as if he had already anticipated his son's reaction. "Lucas, this is not up for discussion." Lucas let out a short, humorless laugh. "You think I'm going to marry a woman just because you tell me to? Because Nathaniel decided to play house with someone else? This is not about you," Eleanor snapped, her patience fraying. "This is about preserving an arrangement that has been in place for years." Lucas's jaw tightened, his expression unreadable. Then, after a long, tense pause, he said, "Find another solution." Sophia should have felt relief. She should have seen this as her way out. But deep down, she knew. This was only the beginning. Sophia sat in stunned silence as the room erupted into a flurry of hushed arguments and desperate negotiations. Her mother's voice was razor sharp, slicing through the tension like a blade. "This arrangement will not be broken," Eleanor said, her tone leaving no room for debate. "Nathaniel's recklessness does not change what has already been decided." Sophia clenched her fists beneath the table, her heart pounding in her chest. How could they talk about her future like she was nothing more than a bargaining chip? She had seen a glimmer of freedom, only to have it ripped away again. Lucas, standing rigid by the doorway, exhaled sharply. "This is absurd," he muttered, running a hand through his dark hair. "You can't expect me to—" "You will," Robert Montgomery cut in, his voice low and firm. "Unless you want to watch our entire empire suffer the consequences of your refusal." Sophia's pulse quickened. This was no longer about marriage. It was about power, business, strategy. Lucas let out a short, humorless laugh, shaking his head. His eyes flickered toward Sophia for a fraction of a second, unreadable, before he turned back to his father. "So I'm supposed to fix Nathaniel's mess. Marry a woman I don't even know." "You will marry Sophia," Eleanor snapped, her patience worn thin. "You will honor this agreement." And Sophia, she turned to her daughter, her gaze steel, like, "You will do your duty." Sophia's mouth ran dry. She could feel Lucas's stare, intense and assessing, like he was sizing her up, just as much as she was him. Then, without another word, he turned on his heel and walked out. The silence he left in his wake was deafening. Margaret sighed, shaking her head as if she had already expected this reaction. "Give him time," she said. "Lucas will come around." Sophia wasn't so sure. That night, she lay awake in bed, her mind tangled in thoughts. She was still trapped. If Lucas agreed, she would be bound to a man even colder than Nathaniel, someone who had made it abundantly clear he wanted nothing to do with her. And if he refused, She didn't know what her mother was capable of, but she did know one thing: Eleanor Carter did not lose. A desperate plan began to form in her mind. If she couldn't escape her fate, maybe she could ruin it. Maybe she could ruin it. Maybe, just maybe, she could make herself unworthy of marriage in her mother's eyes. Sophia sat up, heart racing. There was only one way to ensure this arrangement would never happen. She had to destroy her own innocence. The thought sent a strange mix of fear and exhilaration through her veins. It was reckless, impulsive, completely out of character. But what choice did she have? If she remained pure, they would keep her trapped, pushing her into the arms of a man who didn't want her. But if she walked away with her reputation in ruins, Eleanor would be forced to let her go. The idea rooted itself in her mind, growing stronger with every passing second. She would have to move quickly. The house would be quiet soon. The staff would be asleep. Sophia rose from her bed and hurried to her closet, throwing on something simple but alluring enough to get her noticed. If she was going to do this, she had to make sure it counted. With one last glance at the door, she took a deep breath and slipped out of her bedroom, her pulse thrumming like a war drum. She didn't stop. Not when she passed the dimly lit hallways. Not when she pushed open the side door leading into the cool night air. Not even when she climbed into her car, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She knew exactly where she was going. A place where no one would recognize her. A place where she could disappear, just for one night. A nightclub. The rhythmic thump of bass vibrated through the air as Sophia pushed open the heavy club doors, stepping into a world she had never dared to enter before. The flashing neon lights painted the room in shades of blue and red, casting eerie shadows on the sweaty bodies that moved together on the dance floor. The scent of alcohol, perfume, and something dangerously enticing filled her lungs. Her heart pounded, but not from fear. From the thrill of doing something so recklessly out of character. Tonight, she wasn't Sophia Carter, the obedient daughter of Eleanor Carter. Tonight, she was simply a woman looking for an escape. She made her way through the crowd, her heels clicking against the sticky floor as she approached the bar. The bartender barely glanced at her as he wiped down a glass. What'll it be? Sophia hesitated. She didn't know the names of any drinks. She had never been allowed to indulge before. Something strong, she finally said, feigning confidence. The bartender gave her a knowing smirk before sliding a glass of dark amber liquid across the counter. She picked it up, staring at the swirling liquid for a moment before pressing the rim to her lips and taking a sip. The burn was immediate, searing her throat as she swallowed. She coughed, grimacing, but forced herself to take another. Not much of a drinker, huh? The deep, smooth voice startled her. She turned, meeting the gaze of a man who had taken the seat beside her. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and effortlessly confident. His sharp features were accentuated by the dim lighting, and there was something about him, something magnetic, that made it impossible to look away. Not usually, she admitted, her voice slightly hoarse from the alcohol. A slow, amused smile spread across his lips. Then what brings a girl like you to a place like this? Sophia hesitated. She didn't owe him an explanation. In fact, she had come here to do exactly what her mother would deem unforgivable. And this man, with his dark hair and piercing gaze, seemed like the perfect candidate to help her ruin herself. I'm here to enjoy my night, she said, lifting her chin defiantly. He arched a brow, clearly unconvinced. By drowning yourself in drinks you can't handle? She narrowed her eyes.
Do you always judge strangers at bars?
Only the ones who look like they don't belong. Sophia scoffed and took another sip, determined not to let him get under her skin. but there was something about him, the way he observed her, as if peeling back layers she didn't want exposed, that made her pulse race. The bartender placed another drink in front of him. "Your usual," he said. Sophia tilted her head. "You come here often, then?" "Often enough," he replied, swirling the liquid in his glass before taking a slow sip. "But I've never seen you before." "That's because I don't belong here, remember?" His smirk deepened. "I never said that was a bad thing." The tension between them was thick, charged. It was exactly what she needed. Something reckless, something dangerous, something that would ensure her mother could never force her into marriage with Lucas Montgomery. She leaned in slightly, emboldened by the alcohol and the pulsing energy of the club. His eyes flickered with something unreadable before he downed the rest of his drink and stood, offering his hand. "Lead the way." Sophia took it without hesitation, letting him pull her onto the crowded dance floor. The music throbbed around them, the heavy beat syncing with the erratic rhythm of her heart. His hands found her waist, guiding her effortlessly as they moved together. For the first time in her life, she felt truly free. The music pulsed around them, drowning out every thought, every worry, every piece of the life Sophia had left behind tonight. The man's grip on her waist was firm but not forceful, guiding her as they moved together in perfect rhythm. The boss vibrated through her skin, and for the first time in as long as she could remember, she wasn't thinking, just feeling. His touch was warm, his presence solid, grounding her in this reckless moment. Sophia tilted her head back slightly, eyes half-lidded as she let herself sink into the sensation of his body so close to hers. The alcohol burned through her veins, making her bolder than she'd ever been before. "You never told me your name," she murmured over the music, her lips dangerously close to his ear. The man smirked, his hand tightening slightly on her waist. "You never asked." Sophia pulled back just enough to meet his gaze, the dim lights casting shadows over his chiseled features. He was undeniably handsome. Strong jaw, piercing eyes, a confidence that made it impossible to look away. He radiated danger and control, the kind of man her mother would hate. "Then I'm asking now," she challenged, arching a brow. Luke. Her breath caught for a second, but she forced herself to keep her expression neutral. The irony of it, Lucas Montgomery, her supposed fiancé, had refused her without hesitation, and now she was in a stranger's arms, a man who shared the same name, dancing like she had nothing left to lose. "Luke," she repeated slowly, testing the name on her tongue. "Nice to meet you." His lips curled in amusement. "And you are?" Sophia hesitated. She should lie. She should give him a fake name, keep herself hidden in the anonymity of the night. But something about the way he was looking at her made her want to be reckless. "Sophia." He tilted his head slightly, as if rolling the name over in his mind. She smirked. "You probably say that to every girl you meet here." Luke chuckled, his fingers grazing her lower back as he leaned in, his voice smooth and intoxicating. "Maybe, but I've never met a girl quite like you." Sophia's heart stuttered in her chest, and for a split second, she forgot why she was here in the first place. Forgot that this wasn't about him, that this was about ruining herself, about ensuring she could never be forced into a marriage she didn't want. She needed to stay focused. Tilting her chin up, she met his gaze head on. "Let's get out of here." Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, curiosity, maybe even hesitation. "You sure?" "I wouldn't have said it if I wasn't." Luke studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, let's go." He took her hand, leading her off the dance floor, through the throngs of sweating bodies and flashing lights. The cool night air hit her skin like a shock, as they stepped outside, the club's neon sign buzzing behind them. Luke turned to face her, his gaze searching. "Anywhere but home," she admitted, crossing her arms against the sudden chill. He hesitated. "Are you running from something?" Sophia swallowed hard. "Does it matter?" Luke exhaled, raking a hand through his dark hair. "I guess not." He pulled his car keys from his pocket and nodded toward a sleek black sports car parked near the curb. "Come on. I'll take you somewhere safe." She followed him without hesitation, slipping into the passenger seat. The moment the doors shut, enclosing them in a bubble of silence, the weight of what she was about to do settled in. This was it. No turning back. She had come here to destroy her mother's plans, to ruin herself in the only way Eleanor Carter would never forgive. And Luke, with his dark eyes and careful control, was going to be the one to help her do it. The drive was quiet, but the air inside the car was thick with unspoken tension. The city lights blurred past, streaks of gold and red reflecting off the sleek dashboard. Sophia kept her eyes on the road ahead, but she could feel Luke watching her from the corner of his eye. "You still haven't told me where we're going," he said, his voice smooth but cautious. Sophia exhaled, her fingers gripping the hem of her dress. "Take me to your place." Luke's hands tightened slightly around the steering wheel, his jaw ticking. "Sophia?" "Please," she cut him off, turning to face him. "I don't want to go home, and I don't want to be alone." Something flickered in his expression. Hesitation, curiosity, maybe even concern. But he didn't argue. Instead, he nodded and took the next turn, guiding the car through the quieter streets of the city. Minutes later, they pulled into an underground parking garage. Luke turned off the engine, but he didn't move right away. He sat there, fingers drumming against the steering wheel, before finally shifting to look at her. "Sophia," he said carefully, "I don't usually take strangers home with me." She let out a dry laugh. "You don't seem like the type to bring girls home, period." He smirked but didn't deny it. "You're right, I don't." "Then why make an exception for me?" she challenged. Luke studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes searching. "Because you look like someone who's trying to escape something. And I don't take advantage of women who are running." Sophia swallowed. There it was, that frustrating sense of control he carried, the quiet authority that made her want to push him just to see if he'd break. She reached for her seatbelt and unfastened it slowly. "I'm not running," she said softly. "I know exactly what I'm doing." His jaw clenched slightly, but he didn't respond. Instead, he got out of the car, closing the door behind him. She followed him through the elevator and into the hallway of a high-end apartment complex. The silence between them felt like a wire stretched too tight, waiting to snap. When they reached his door, he unlocked it and stepped aside. "You sure about this?" Sophia met his gaze, her pulse pounding. Yes. The moment she stepped inside, she was met with a space that was both minimalist and meticulously clean. Dark wooden floors, sleek furniture, and a large floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the city. No personal touches. No framed photos. Just sharp, calculated perfection. Luke shrugged off his jacket and tossed his keys onto the counter. "Make yourself comfortable." Sophia turned to face him. "You live alone?" "Yeah," he said, running a hand through his hair. "Too quiet for you." She shook her head. "No, just, I expected something different." Luke let out a quiet chuckle. "And what exactly were you expecting?" She hesitated. "I don't know. Something less controlled." His smirk faltered for just a second before he looked away. "I like order." Sophia took a slow step toward him, her heart hammering. "I don't." His gaze snapped back to hers, dark and unreadable. The tension between them crackled like a live wire. "Sophia," he murmured, his voice lower this time. She didn't let him finish. She closed the distance between them, pressing her palms against his chest, feeling the solid warmth beneath his shirt. "Let me have this," she whispered. "Let me forget, just for tonight." Luke exhaled sharply, his hands coming up to grasp her wrists. "You're drunk." "I'm not," she countered, eyes locked onto his. "I know what I want." He let out a quiet curse, his grip tightening. "You don't even know me." "I don't need to," she said, her voice steady. "You're not them. That's all that matters." Luke's expression hardened, but something in his eyes betrayed him. He was fighting something. Himself, maybe. Then, finally, his control snapped. His lips crashed onto hers, and the world blurred around them. The kiss was fire and destruction all at once. It wasn't gentle, wasn't hesitant. It was raw, desperate, like he was trying to chase away whatever storm had brought her here, and she was trying to drown in the very thing that could ruin her. Luke's hands found her waist, pulling her closer as she melted into him, her fingers tangling in his dark hair. His touch was controlled, measured, but there was an undeniable heat beneath it, a restraint that felt like it could snap at any moment. Sophia pressed herself against him, urging him to lose the last thread of hesitation, to stop thinking, stop holding back. But then, just as quickly as it had started, he pulled away. His breathing was ragged, his jaw tight as he stepped back, running a hand through his hair like he was trying to shake off the moment. "This isn't a good idea," he muttered, voice rough. Sophia's pulse pounded in her ears, her lips still tingling from the force of his kiss. Luke let out a short, humorless laugh. "Because you don't want me, Sophia. You want an escape." She swallowed, heat rising to her cheeks.
What if I do?
His gaze locked onto hers, intense and unreadable. Then, "You're running from something you don't know how to face, and I don't take advantage of that." The words felt like a slap, stinging more than she expected. She had come here with the intention of ruining herself, of ensuring that her mother could never force her into marriage with Lucas Montgomery. And yet, the man standing before her, the man who had every opportunity to do exactly what she wanted, was stopping. "You think I don't know what I'm doing?" she challenged, crossing her arms. "I think you're trying too hard to prove something," Luke countered, his voice steady. "And I'm not going to be the mistake you regret tomorrow morning." Sophia exhaled sharply, turning away from him. She hated that he was right, hated that he saw through her so easily. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly feeling small in the vast, empty space of his apartment. Then, "Why did you kiss me?" For a moment, he didn't answer. Then, in a voice quieter than she expected, he said, "Because I wanted to." Her heart clenched at the admission, the honesty in his tone cutting through her frustration. She turned back to face him, her resolve wavering. "Then don't stop." Luke's expression was unreadable, his fingers flexing at his sides like he was battling some internal war. Then he sighed, shaking his head. "Sophia, go get some sleep. We'll talk in the morning." She stared at him for a long moment before nodding slowly. She didn't have the energy to argue. Luke led her to the spare bedroom, pulling open the door. "You can stay here tonight." Sophia stepped inside, but before he could leave, she turned back to him. She said softly. Luke hesitated, then nodded. "Good night, Sophia." The door closed behind him, and for the first time in years, she fell asleep, feeling safe. Sophia woke up to the soft glow of morning light filtering through the curtains, casting golden streaks across the unfamiliar bedroom. For a moment, she forgot where she was. The bed was too comfortable. The sheet smelled like cedar and something distinctly masculine. It wasn't until she heard the muffled sounds of movement outside the door that the memories of the previous night came rushing back. The club, the drive, the kiss. Luke. Luke. Her stomach twisted as she sat up, running a hand through her tangled hair. She had walked into his life like a storm, expecting him to destroy her, to be the final nail in the coffin of her mother's arranged marriage plans. But instead of taking what she offered, he had stopped, resisted, protected her from herself. Why? Sophia stood, straightening her dress as best she could before cautiously stepping out into the hallway. The air smelled of fresh coffee, and as she followed the scent, she found Luke in the kitchen. His back turned to her as he poured a steaming cup. He was wearing a simple t-shirt and sweatpants, his usual cold demeanor softened by the early morning stillness. She hesitated in the doorway, unsure of what to say. "Coffee?" he asked without looking at her, his voice calm, measured. Sophia exhaled, stepping further into the room. "Yeah, thanks." He handed her a mug, their fingers brushing briefly. The contact sent a strange jolt through her, but Luke didn't seem to notice. He simply leaned against the counter, taking a sip of his own coffee, watching her with that unreadable gaze of his. "Did you sleep okay?" She nodded, staring down into her cup. "Better than I expected." A beat of silence passed before he spoke again. "So..." Sophia looked up, meeting his gaze. There was no accusation in his voice, no judgment. Just curiosity, maybe even concern. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I can't go home." Luke set his mug down, crossing his arms. "Sophia running away isn't a solution." She let out a dry laugh, shaking her head. "You sound like you know something about that." For a moment, something flickered in his expression, something guarded, almost like regret. But it was gone before she could decipher it. "Look," he said, rubbing a hand over his jaw. "I don't know what's going on with you and your family, but whatever it is, you need to face it. Staying here isn't going to fix anything." Sophia clenched her jaw, frustration bubbling beneath her skin. "You don't understand. My mother, she controls everything. Who I see, what I wear, who I marry, and I don't want to be part of her perfect little plan anymore." Luke studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "You think sleeping with a stranger would solve that?" Sophia flinched, his words cutting deeper than she expected. She looked away, gripping her coffee cup tightly. "It would have changed things." "It would have changed you," he corrected, his voice softer now. "And not in the way you wanted." She swallowed hard, hating that he was right. Hating that she had been so desperate for control that she was willing to destroy herself in the process. Luke pushed off the counter, grabbing his car keys. "Come on." Sophia frowned. "Where are we going?" "I'm taking you home." Panic surged through her. "No, I can't." "You have to, Sophia," he interrupted, his tone firm but not unkind. "You can't avoid this forever." She stared at him, her heart pounding. Going home meant facing Eleanor, facing the reality of her situation. But maybe Luke was right. Maybe it was time to stop running. The drive back to her house felt heavier than the night before. Gone was the reckless thrill, the intoxicating freedom she had stolen for herself. In its place was dread, pressing against her chest like a weight she couldn't shake. Sophia sat in the passenger seat, arms crossed tightly over her body as she stared out the window. The city passed by in a blur, but all she could think about was the confrontation waiting for her at home. She wasn't ready. Luke didn't speak for most of the drive, his hand steady on the wheel, his expression unreadable. He didn't ask if she had changed her mind, didn't offer any empty reassurances. He had made his stance clear. Running wouldn't solve anything, and as much as she hated to admit it, part of her knew he was right. Still, when the towering gates of the Carter estate came into view, her pulse quickened. Luke pulled up to the front entrance, shifting the car into park but making no move to turn off the engine. He glanced at her, his dark eyes steady. "You sure about this?" Sophia let out a shaky breath. Not even a little. His mouth quirked in something like amusement, but it faded quickly. "You can do this." She didn't answer. Her fingers curled around the door handle, but she didn't move. Inside that house was her mother. Inside that house was control, suffocation, expectation. Outside, in this car, was the last piece of freedom she might ever have. Luke must have sensed her hesitation because he exhaled and reached for the gear shift. "Say the word, and I'll keep driving." Her head snapped toward him, her heart lurching at the quiet offer. "You don't have to go back," he said simply. "Not yet. If you need time, if you need a real escape, I can give you that." For a moment, she considered it. It would be so easy to say yes, to let him drive away from this place, from this life, and pretend, for just a little longer, that she had a choice, but reality had a way of catching up no matter how fast you ran. Sophia swallowed hard and shook her head. "No, I need to do this." Luke studied her for a moment before nodding. "All right." She pushed the door open and stepped out, her legs feeling unsteady beneath her. The mansion loomed in front of her, an elegant prison wrapped in marble and iron gates. Before she could take a step, she felt Luke's hand wrapped gently around her wrist. She turned, startled by the unexpected touch. His grip was firm, grounding. His expression unreadable. "If you need anything." He hesitated, as if choosing his next words carefully. "If you need to leave, really leave, call me." Sophia stared at him, something unfamiliar tightening in her chest. He barely knew her. He had every reason to walk away, to let her deal with the consequences of her choices on her own. But he wasn't. She nodded, her throat too tight to form words. With that, he let her go. She turned and walked toward the front door, her every step feeling heavier than the last. Before she could reach for the handle, the door swung open. Her mother stood there, arms crossed, eyes sharp with barely restrained fury. "Where have you been?" Eleanor's voice was ice, controlled but laced with something more. Something dangerous. Sophia lifted her chin, refusing to shrink under her mother's glare. "Out." Eleanor's gaze flickered past her, landing on the car idling behind her. Luke was still there. Watching. Watching. Eleanor's lips curled slightly, her head tilting. Sophia hesitated for only a second. No one. Her mother gave her a long, assessing look before stepping aside. Sophia glanced back one last time, but Luke was already pulling away. She swallowed the lump in her throat and stepped into the house, the door closing behind her like the sound of a lock clicking into place. The moment the heavy doors shut behind her, Sophia felt the walls of the mansion close in around her like a cage snapping shut. The air inside was thick with unspoken fury, and she could hear the sharp clicks of her mother's heels against the marble floor as Eleanor stalked ahead, leading them toward the grand sitting room. Sophia followed slowly, her heartbeat pounding like a drum in her ears. She knew what was coming. There would be no screaming. No emotional outbursts. That wasn't Eleanor Carter's style. No, her mother's anger was quieter, more dangerous, like a blade hidden beneath silk. Eleanor turned once they were inside, her gaze cold and assessing. "Sit." Sophia hesitated for only a moment before lowering herself onto the velvet couch. She kept her spine straight, her hands clenched in her lap. Eleanor remained standing, her piercing eyes never leaving Sophia's face. Out, Sophia said, her voice flat. Eleanor's expression didn't change, but the air around them felt sharper, like a storm on the edge of breaking. Out where? Sophia lifted her chin. A club. A flicker of something passed through her mother's gaze. Disgust, disappointment, maybe even anger. Do you think this is a game, Sophia? No, she said, her nails digging into her palms. I think this is my life. Eleanor let out a quiet breath, as if trying to summon patience she didn't actually possess. And yet you continue to make decisions as if that were true. Sophia clenched her jaw. Because it is true. Her mother's lips pressed into a thin line. Let me make something very clear, Sophia. You do not have the luxury of reckless behavior. You do not have the privilege of making foolish mistakes like other girls your age. You are a Carter. Your actions affect more than just yourself. Sophia exhaled sharply, her frustration bubbling over. Is that why you've decided to sell me off like a business transaction? Eleanor's gaze darkened. Enough. But Sophia wasn't finished. You never even asked me if I wanted this. You just assumed I'd go along with it like I always have. Like I don't have a say in my own future. You don't, Eleanor said smoothly, as if the words weren't enough to shatter her. And I suggest you stop pretending otherwise. Sophia let out a bitter laugh. You can't force me to marry Lucas Montgomery, Mother. Her mother's lips curled slightly, like she had been waiting for this moment. Oh, but I can. And I will. Sophia's stomach twisted. Eleanor stepped closer, lowering herself to Sophia's level, her voice dropping to something quiet, lethal. Let me tell you how this is going to work. You will marry Lucas Montgomery. You will do it with a smile on your face, and you will play the part of the perfect wife because that is what is expected of you. Sophia's throat tightened, but she forced herself to meet her mother's gaze. And if I don't... Eleanor tilted her head, almost amused. Then you'll leave me no choice but to ensure you do. A chill ran down Sophia's spine. There was no mistaking the threat in her mother's voice. She could fight. She could scream. She could tell her mother that she would never marry a man she didn't choose. But Eleanor Carter always got what she wanted. And this time was no different. A sense of defeat settled over her like a heavy weight. She had tried to escape, tried to take control of her own life, but in the end, none of it had mattered. Her mother had already won. Eleanor straightened, smoothing out her dress like they had just finished discussing the weather. The Montgomerys will be expecting us for dinner tomorrow night. I suggest you prepare yourself. Sophia felt like the air had been knocked from her lungs. Tomorrow. Tomorrow. Her future was already being signed away, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Eleanor turned toward the door but paused.
Oh, and Sophia.
She didn't look at her. Her mother's voice was soft, but the warning in it was unmistakable. Don't embarrass me again. With that, she walked away, leaving Sophia alone with the crushing weight of her fate. The next evening arrived far too quickly, and Sophia found herself standing before the grand doors of the Montgomery estate, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. The golden glow of the chandeliers inside cast long, elegant shadows across the marble steps. But to her, this place felt less like a home and more like a well-polished prison. Her mother's voice rang in her head. Don't embarrass me again. She exhaled sharply, forcing down the bitterness rising in her throat. This wasn't a dinner. It was a transaction, a confirmation of a deal that had been decided long before she ever had a say. The doors opened, and Margaret Montgomery greeted them with a perfectly rehearsed smile, all warmth and charm, as if this wasn't the equivalent of an arranged business merger. "Sophia, my dear, it's wonderful to finally have you here." Sophia returned the smile, though it felt hollow. "Thank you, Mrs. Montgomery. Please call me Margaret." She stepped aside, allowing Sophia and Eleanor to enter. The dining room was lavish, the long mahogany table adorned with flickering candlelight and delicate crystal glasses. At the far end of the room, Sophia spotted him. Lucas Montgomery. Unlike the rest of his family, he wasn't dressed for the occasion. While his father and mother wore their impeccable evening attire, Lucas sat there in his usual crisp white shirt, with the top button undone, sleeves rolled up to his forearms. He looked utterly indifferent, swirling the amber liquid in his glass as if this entire event was nothing more than a waste of his time. When his gaze finally lifted to meet hers, something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, surprise, maybe even amusement. Sophia's stomach twisted. He knew. Somehow he knew. The same man who had stopped her from making the worst mistake of her life at the club, the man who had driven her home and told her to face her demons, was the very same man she was now being forced to marry. Her pulse roared in her ears. Before she could react, Margaret gestured toward Lucas. "I believe you two have already met." Lucas set down his drink, leaning back in his chair with infuriating ease. "Not formally." Sophia's jaw tightened. "Not formally, after everything." Eleanor took her seat at the table, smiling as if this night was unfolding exactly as she had planned. "Sophia, sit." She hesitated but did as she was told, taking the seat across from Lucas. She could feel his gaze on her, could hear the unspoken words hanging between them. "So this is fate's idea of a joke?" Robert Montgomery cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "We're pleased this arrangement is coming together smoothly. Our families have much to gain from this union." Sophia's fingers tightened around the edge of her napkin. She wanted to scream, to stand up and walk out, to tell them all that she refused to be a pawn in their carefully constructed plans. But Lucas spoke first. "I want to speak to Sophia alone." The table fell into stunned silence. Eleanor's eyes narrowed slightly, but Margaret smiled, though there was something calculating in it. "Of course. Take your time." Lucas rose from his chair, nodding toward the balcony doors. Without waiting for her to respond, he walked outside, hands shoved into his pockets. Sophia hesitated, then pushed her chair back and followed. The night air was crisp, the city lights twinkling in the distance. Lucas stood at the edge of the balcony, his back to her. She crossed her arms. "So you knew." He turned slightly, his expression unreadable. "I figured it out last night." Sophia exhaled sharply. "And yet you didn't say anything." Lucas tilted his head, amusement flickering in his eyes. Her jaw clenched. "I don't know. Maybe." He studied her for a long moment before speaking. "Do you want to marry me, Sophia?" The question caught her off guard.
No.
She said honestly. Lucas nodded as if he had expected that. "Then, why are you here?" Her breath hitched. Because she had no choice. Because her mother had made it clear resistance was futile. Because even though she wanted to fight, she had nowhere left to run. Lucas exhaled and turned fully to face her. "Here's the thing, Sophia. I don't want this marriage any more than you do. But if I walk away, the consequences won't just affect me. They'll affect my family, my company, everything I've built." Sophia swallowed hard.
So what? You're just gonna accept it?
His gaze darkened. "No. I'm going to make sure that if we have to go through with this, we are the ones in control, not our parents." Sophia frowned. What does that mean? Lucas took a step closer, his voice lowering. It means if I'm going to marry you, then you and I need to make one thing clear. This is our game now. Her pulse pounded. Lucas Montgomery wasn't offering her a way out. He was offering her a war. Sophia stared at Lucas, her heart pounding like a war drum inside her chest. His words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. This is our game now. He wasn't offering her an escape. He was offering her control. For the first time in her life, someone wasn't telling her what to do. Someone wasn't demanding her submission. Lucas Montgomery was handing her a choice. One wrapped in strategy, in rebellion, in the dangerous promise of freedom disguised as captivity. She exhaled slowly, forcing herself to meet his gaze. And what exactly does that mean? He smirked, tilting his head slightly, his hands still tucked casually into his pockets. It means that if we're going to be forced into this, we do it on our terms. No more being pawns in their little business arrangement. Sophia crossed her arms. And how do you suggest we do that? Our families have already planned everything. The wedding, the deal, our future. Lucas took a step closer, his voice dropping to something quieter, more dangerous. Then we changed the rules. Her breath hitched. You and I control the narrative, he continued. They think they're putting two strangers together for their own benefit. Fine. But what if, instead, we become the very thing they don't want? What if we play this game so well that they have no choice but to watch as we rewrite their plans? Sophia swallowed hard. So, you want to pretend? Not pretend, Lucas corrected. We become partners. We decide what this marriage looks like. We decide what they see and what they don't. We make them believe we're exactly what they wanted. We make them believe we're exactly what they wanted, while making sure we never lose control of our own lives in the process. The way he spoke, the sharp confidence in his tone, sent a thrill through her. He wasn't afraid of them. And for the first time in a long time, Sophia didn't feel afraid either. She glanced back toward the dining room, where their parents sat, oblivious to the storm brewing just outside. And what happens if one of us wants out? Lucas's smirk faltered slightly, and for a moment, something unreadable flickered in his gaze. Then, we end it on our terms, not theirs. Sophia pressed her lips together, considering his offer. It was insane, reckless, dangerous. And yet, it was the only way she saw herself surviving this. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and met his eyes. Fine. Lucas arched a brow. Fine. She nodded. Fine. We play their game, but we play it our way. A slow, almost satisfied grin spread across his face. Now that's the kind of answer I was hoping for. Sophia felt her stomach twist, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from anticipation. Lucas stepped closer, his voice lowering so only she could hear. Then let's give them a show, fiancé. Before she could respond, he reached for her hand and pulled her toward him, closing the last bit of space between them. Her breath caught, but she didn't pull away. Inside, through the glass doors, she could see their parents watching now, their gazes locked on the two of them. Lucas smirked. They're waiting for us. Then, without hesitation, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. Sophia froze for half a second before instinct took over. She didn't fight it, didn't pull away. She let herself lean in, let herself play the part he had promised her. The perfect, willing bride to be. And just like that, the war had begun. At its core, Bound by Fate is a story about control, choice, and the power of rewriting our own destiny. Sophia and Lucas were both trapped by expectations, by family obligations, by a future they never asked for. But instead of surrendering, they found a way to turn their circumstances into an opportunity. The biggest lesson here is that even when life feels out of our hands, we are never truly powerless. Society, family, or tradition may try to dictate our paths, but we always have the ability to shape our own narrative. Whether it's through rebellion, resilience, or strategy, we can find ways to carve out freedom even in the most confined situations. Another key takeaway is that real partnerships, whether in love, friendship, or business, are built on mutual respect and understanding. Lucas and Sophia didn't start with love, but they built something even stronger first. Trust. Their relationship wasn't based on obligation, but on the shared desire to take control of their fate. And in the end, it wasn't just about avoiding a forced marriage. It was about learning to fight for themselves. Lastly, this story reminds us that sometimes the things we fear the most can turn into the best things that ever happened to us. Sophia spent her life running from the idea of an arranged marriage, but in that journey, she found something unexpected, genuine connection, strength, and love in a place she never would have looked. Where are you watching from? I'd love to hear where you're from. Drop your country in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more gripping stories like this one. See you in the next one.